Is he one of the true big movers and shakers ever of pop music, would you say? Is he kind of
absolutely. Well, you got the Beatles here and the Buggles up here.
Hi everyone, welcome to part 2 of our special look at the amazing career of Trevor Horn. With me on the screen is my special guest Jamie Sefton joining me again. Hi Jamie.
Hello, hi James. How are you
we've
doing?
left it, good, thank you. We've left it a few weeks since recording part 1, and in the intervening time I have increased my Trevor Horn personal collection with the addition of this.
Wow.
Yeah.
There you go.
I found
it's always
it
good to kick it off with a major artist like
absolutely
Dollar,
yeah I found that in my local antiques place for a couple of pounds, so
it's so cheesy. I mean, I've got this thing about Dollar, and it is a bit embarrassing kind of buying the records, but the 4 tracks that Trevor Horn did with Dollar were just fantastic. Mirror Mirror, and they were just really good pop songs.
Right, anyway, so we need to recap very slightly, because in our previous video, and for anybody who hasn't checked out that video, I'll link to it, we kind of talked about Trevor's early career. We went through the Buggles, and we went through ABC and a couple of his productions from around that time, but we came slightly out of sync. We started talking about Frankie Goes to Hollywood, and we spent quite a long time on that, but according to the chronology of how things panned out, we really should have talked about this record. This is Duck Rock.
Yeah, indeed.
Which he recorded with Malcolm McClaren, and this was actually in 1983, so it actually predated Frankie.
I think you learned a lot from working on that record as well, because it's such a kind of left turn, really. It's such a kind of weird. It's a weird album. I mean, it's like Malcolm McClaren with what they call the Supreme team, sort of DJs, and like a bunch of kind of rappers, and it's just like a really strange album. It's like got African rhythms and stuff and scratching, and it's just such a melting pot of ideas, but it's such a great record, and I think it's such a quirky record. And I think for Trevor Horn, I think he just fancied working on this kind of crazy project, and he went all over the world, sampled loads of really amazing artists, and just had a great time making it. And I think that a lot of the team that were built around that time to make that record, with all the sampling and stuff, helped to create the records like the Frankie records and things going forward.
I think I heard an interview with him back in the day where he said he found it quite ironic, because he was such a kind of square figure in a way, Trevor Horn. He was, he was very much just kind of sweater wearing, just a kind of classic old school producer in a sense, even though he was at the cutting edge of all this amazing pop music. He himself was a fairly kind of square, normal, almost like a kind of dad-like figure. And after he made the Duck Rock album, he got this huge profile in kind of it was a black urban America. It was just, all these rappers were just saying, I love that record. And I think he found that quite amusing, that he'd gone from being in this fairly sort of, not naff exactly, but the Buggles didn't really have artistic credibility as such, apart from perhaps amongst a very small coterie of people who kind of understood how good it was, to being this kind of very sort of urban sampling and scratching kind of early pioneer, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I said in the last podcast he was in an area of New York in the Bronx, and he saw all these young kids, these black kids, all doing amazing kind of street dancing and stuff, and to Malcolm McClaren, and to also Beatbox by Art of Noise, and he just was this kind of normal looking white guy stood watching these kids, and they probably had no idea that Trevor Horn was the person that made it, and so he was just in this position where I think for that 83, 84, he was the number one producer in the world. No one could kind of touch him, really.
Yeah, and then again, a bit like in part 1, where we had to kind of do this weird kind of lurch leftwards into Yes, because after the Buggles, he and Jeff Downes joined Yes, they did the Drama album and all this. Now we have to do something very similar, because in 83 he then teams up with Yes again, having done this very sort of urban project full of credibility and cutting edge, and then he goes back and does an album not as a member of Yes, as he'd been previously, but as a producer. And he makes this album 90125, which contains this absolute monster hit, Owner of a Lonely Heart, which is still one of the most played songs in the UK on daytime radio. It'll be played at lunchtime radio 2 at least once a week. It's just one of those records that is kind of permeated into pop culture. Now, I remember the first time I heard that record, it was when I think I was about 19. I was at university, and it just blew my head off. The first time I heard it, when that riff comes in, I'd never heard anything so punchy and just so kind of tightly controlled. It was like, my God, here is somebody who is just totally in command of everything that he's got at his disposal, the technology, the musicians. He's got them on a really short chain. He's getting them to do what he wants. I mean, do you want to tell them? There's a really famous story, isn't there, about him working with Yes, who are this ultimate proggy bunch of players. What's the story about how he got them to actually perform on that song?
Well, I think it was Trevor Rabin who came up with the down, 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 and it was just on a demo tape. I think he just kind of improvised it, and then Trevor Horn went, it's that riff. But when he came to record it, of course, Yes, we're just into all their little trills, and they kept going din diddlin din 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 din, and they wouldn't play it like da 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 da. He was like, he describes it as kind of tugging on their trouser legs, to please just play the riff normally. And he eventually got it. And I think that the whole album, was quite a tough experience for Trevor. I think that it was very difficult. He got he had trouble with the record company in America, and he were giving feedback that they didn't like it and all this kind of stuff. And
right, okay.
But out of the experience of doing the album, he used to go in and jam with Ann Dudley and JJ Jaksalik and Gary Langan and muck about making Art of Noise records. And some of the drum beat from Art of Noise is from the 90125 sessions. They took a drum beat. Alan White, I think it was. And it's a fantastic record. It's super kind of slick and smooth. And I think, there's that bit in Owner of a Lonely Heart where there's an amazing guitar solo, and then it suddenly drops down to just like a little electric guitar, and it's like goes massive and then comes down to these little moments, and it's just so beautiful in its kind of composition and its little tricks. And actually, I think there's a video, isn't there, online where you can. I think Trevor Horn talks you through a kind of breakdown of the whole making of the track, which is definitely worth watching. It's
quite interesting because there are quite a few tracks on this album which are kind of. They do sort of just sound like 80s arena rock, really. I'm thinking of stuff like Lonely Heart and It Can Happen. But there's a couple of tracks that seem to go off into proper Trevor Horn territory. I'm thinking of Leave It. That to me is classic 1983 Trevor Horn.
Have you heard the 12 inches, actually? The 12 inches of Owner of a Lonely Heart and Leave It are basically like Art of Noise. They're like Art of Noise 12 inches, where he kind of, basically samples the voices of John Anderson, and he just kind of feeds them in and has like these mad sounds over this kind of drum effect, really. And they're just kind of riffs with Trevor Horn mucking about in a studio with a Fairlight. And but I think you're right. I think some of them do sound quite sort of typical. Cinema is just like a rock kind of riff, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Typical Yes trills and stuff like that. Whereas, Hearts and Changes as well. They have some beautiful moments in it where it's real kind of great production, where he just kind of moves through all these kind of variations on a theme. And it's a great piece of work.
It's very symphonic, and I think the clever thing was that he was able to, I think more so than on Drama, ironically, because on Drama he wasn't the producer, I don't think, was he? He was just the singer and the lyric writer, whatever. But on this record, even though he's not in the band, arguably he has more of an influence on this record than he did on Drama, because Drama sounds like a kind of old school Yes record that's got Trevor Horn singing on it, whereas this sounds like this is a total new reimagining of what Yes is.
Well, he revitalised their careers. Because of MTV and all that. Owner of a Lonely Heart, like you say, just got played back to back. It was such a massive record.
And then he did, if we just really briefly, because he doesn't have much to do with this, but this is a few years later, so we need to skip ahead. He does then do a few tracks on this record as well, Big Generator, but he's only one of several producers on this one. So he clearly he did continue working with them to an extent, but it was not destined to be a kind of long-term thing. I don't know what happened to Yes after this. I never bought any of their records after this, so I don't know quite what happened, but clearly they decided to sort of part the ways, or it wasn't going to be something which was going to be sustained, which is quite strange when you think about how massive this was. You'd think it'd be a kind of Def Leppard Mutt Lange situation where they'd have just gone on to make X number of records again with him, just in that style. But I think there was.
I think that's part of Trevor Horn's MO, if you like. He doesn't really stick around with artists very much. I mean, the only person that he's really done that with is, like I said before, is Seal. Where he's produced, I think 7, 8, even 9 albums by him.
Yeah.
But he tends to get. I think he just gets bored. I think he just wants to kind of work with new artists and new people and work and do new stuff.
Yeah, so I guess we should now talk about Art of Noise, which is this really amazing experimental. Don't want to use the word avant-garde really, because it gets bandied around a lot. But
I'll show off again. It's my signed copy. So
oh, look at that, beautiful.
Yeah, nice picture disc.
Noise. A friend of mine, I went on holiday and I had this friend, and she came along and she brought a cassette of Moments in Love. Yeah. And we just played that tape. It was like just all day, every day for a week. It was just like, never heard anything like this. It was so beautiful. But oddly enough, though, when I later got to hear The Art of Noise, I kind of had a bit of a shock, really, because that track is very beautiful and sugar sweet, and it's almost got a bit of a dollar feel to it in places, that very sort of, tinkly thing. But Art of Noise, actually, they were quite, they could be quite abrasive. They could be quite kind of industrial and a bit unnerving and, quite cutting edge, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's very atmospheric, this album, I think. There's some tracks on here where it's like just basically sound of someone like walking. It sounds like they're walking through a church, and there's like, a church organ, and there's like church bells, and just this sound of steps walking through a kind of like, sounds like a cathedral, and it's very spooky. It's like a sort of horror film almost, very soundtrack. And I think, it's got some wonderful moments like that on here. But of course, the big, where I first heard The Art of Noise was it was Close to the Edit, which was the kind of, the one with all the drums in it, and the kind of car starting and all that kind of stuff. And I just thought that was incredible. I couldn't believe how good that was. And obviously there's a nice little nod to Yes on here, isn't there? Obviously with Close to the Edge, and it's like called Close to the Edit. Yeah, because they were using like Yes samples and things. But it's a great piece of work, and I think they're reissuing this for Record Store Day as well, like a 2 LP version, limited edition. So I'm hopefully going to get that. But yeah, I loved the whole look of Art of Noise, and the fact they used to hide their faces, and it was very much about a kind of shadowy, kind of pop lit factory type thing. You didn't quite know what they were up to, and it was all Paul Morley kind of writing all this oblique kind of stuff on their sleeves, and it was very much part of the ZTT thing of ZTT Records, and that kind of the idea very much that Trevor Horn liked, which was this idea of a record label that would do kind of pop factory type stuff, but very unconventional stuff.
Yeah, it was definitely part of the spirit of the age. I mean, we talked a little bit about post-punk in the previous installments, and I think I'll say again that this kind of whole period, it just, I don't know, it has this aura of post-punk hanging over it. Just this kind of like it's sort of DIY. It's very arty. It's very experimental, and it's not just music. It seems to have an entire kind of ethos behind it, or an aesthetic, which just goes beyond whatever, being in a pop group or writing some music. There's a lot more going on, isn't there?
I think a lot of it. I thought a lot of the spirit of the label, I think, came through Paul Morley and his vision for what they wanted to present as the label. I mean, I'm kind of, we mentioned Frankie in the last Frankie was already in the last podcast. video vodcast, but
Podcast.
I
Yeah.
didn't get a chance. I didn't get a chance to show this off. This is a 12-inch of Welcome to the Pleasure Dome,
Superb.
and it just has the catalogue number of the record on the front and a bowl of fruit, and that's it. And you know, it doesn't have the name of the band, it doesn't have the name of the track.
No.
And then on the back, it's got, like, you know, some pictures of the band, and it says some stuff at the bottom about what it is. But, you know, it's very brave. And I think Paul Morley was obviously massively influenced by Factory Records, who just used to have very oblique covers with color-coded stuff where you had to work out what the name of the band was and what the record was. But I think, you know, this is you know, a top, at the time, a pop artist. You know, an artist like, you know, a boy band or whatever, you know, they're a pop group that were doing, you know, pop stuff, and yet they release record, you know, 12 inches like this. It's very against, very, you know, anti-commercial in a way. It's kind of like, well, we're just going to put this on the cover, you know, bollocks to the kid. They have to find it. The kids are going to have to find what record it is, you know, which I think is just fantastic. That's why I love their packaging and the stuff from that time. Yeah,
but I mean, again, as we were talking about last week, there's this curious thing as you go through Trevor Horn's career. There's this kind of multi-focus thing where you've got all this experimental stuff, which is really cutting edge. But then he always seems able then to just bring it kind of crashing straight into what you'd think of as being kind of very sort of mainstream chart orientated. So this is Grace Jones now, which again, 85, so it's 1 year after Art of Noise, and you can see how fast he's moving. He's like Duck Rock 83, 90125 83, Art of Noise 84, and now we're in 85, and he does this album, this Grace Jones album, which just explodes, doesn't it?
I think, you know, if you're looking for entry points for people who want to know what Trevor Horn is about, I think Welcome to the Pleasure Dome, obviously, I think that first side and Two Tribes and Relax are just, you know, a great example of what Trevor Horn can do with the kind of massive epic productions. But I think as a whole, this album, I think, is just pure Trevor Horn. It's just Trevor Horn with a synclavier, which is his latest toy, mucking about in the studio and just having fun with it. Because a lot of the tracks on here are just basically remixes of Slave to the Rhythm or slight variations and stuff. And there's just some fantastic just mucking about where he's kind of, there's a track which is just a loop and he's just panning the track left and right and then doing kind of wobbles between the speakers. And it's just it's full of kind of gags, as he would call them, you know, full of these little kind of technical wizardry things that he's obviously just mucking about with and having fun with. Just a tour de force of Trevor Horn. I think if you want to really kind of hear what one person can do with an artist, where the artist just goes, look, just, you know, reinvent, reissue. You know, Grace Jones knew exactly what she was doing by using Trevor Horn, because her image was being remixed. You know, her image was being cut up and changed and put back to front and changed anyway. So this is a kind of, you know, as well as being a visual cut up, it's a kind of, that's what they were doing. And it's just a really beautifully polished, silly in places, muck about with millions of pounds of studio equipment. It's fantastic. But as well as that, I mean, Slave to the Rhythm itself is a beautiful production, and the rhythms in that and the live drums that they sampled and the loop they got going and stuff is just, you know, second to none. And I think, you know, Neil Tennant says it's his favourite Trevor Horn production.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a stupendous piece of work, and it's so. I think, I mean, you know, I can hear it coming through in your words there. It's still cherished, I think, by an entire generation of music fans who were always kind of technologically kind of orientated. You know, I mean, you know, I've got other friends, you know, mutual friends that you know as well. You know, certain people who just absolutely love love Grace Jones and that whole period, because it seems to lie at the root, or be part of the root of so much that came after it, just in terms of electronic stuff that was, I mean, you know, 85, it's still kind of early days, isn't it? In a way, if you think about the whole sampling revolution, there was so much still to come. But yeah, that album, it seems like a kind of, like a seminal text almost, to sound pretentious for a minute, a seminal moment in the evolution of it all. And
Yeah, well, it's been sampled as well. You know, there's
yeah,
a famous track by The Orb,
yeah, yeah.
which is forever. I can never remember the name of it. An
No,
ever-growing, pulsating brain from the
brain.
center of the ultra world, or something
Yeah,
that I think that they did. Is Jimmy Courtier at the KLF
yeah,
and The Orb
mm,
worked on that track, and they sample a bit of Slave to the Rhythm,
yeah, yeah.
and it is definitely a very influential
Mm.
album, I think.
Okay, so I mean, do you want to talk about Godley and Cream next? I've got that down as being 85.
Yeah, I mean,
But I've
just
got
very briefly, I just
Propaganda
want
as
to
well.
mention,
Okay,
yeah,
yeah,
just very briefly, this is just Cry, which Trevor Horn produced, again, just at the height of his powers, really. You can
yeah.
see his picture there, actually, use his face in the video as well. Because Godley and Cream, obviously, they made a lot of the Frankie videos and a lot of the stuff they were working with Trevor anyway, and then worked with him, I think, on a couple of experimental tracks. But in the end, I think at this point, Trevor Horn said, "Look, I'm sick of doing all this tech mucking
Mm.
about with samples. Can we just do a normal song?" So he just
Right,
said,
okay.
"Have you got a song we can just do as a normal
So,
recording?" And so that's why he recorded Cry. But I think it's just, again, a beautifully produced track, and again, went to #1 in America and around the world, and it's just a cracking production.
brilliant. Yeah, and of course, you can say there's a clear link. We were talking in the last installment about the link between, say, symphonic pop in the 1970s
Mm.
and the Buggles. You can definitely hear, I mean, 10cc were the original kind of Art of Noise, weren't they? In a way, they were. I mean,
Absolutely, yeah.
they were
I
just
think,
informed by the exact same kind of experimental. Let's pull pop music into pieces and just reassemble it and do something interesting with it. And that's kind
yeah,
of
for
what the
me,
Art of
it's
Noise was.
yeah. I mean, for me, it's really exciting that because I love 10cc, I absolutely love them to bits, and so when Lol Cream joined Art of Noise, in the late '90s, and they did the album together, that was, for me, was like a kind of coming together of all these strands of music. It's like, right, okay, yeah, I
Yeah, yeah,
understand where my music taste has come
yeah.
from, and
It's
I can
like
understand why.
it's like
Mm.
Jeff Lynne joining the Beatles in
Yes, yeah,
1996 or whatever it was. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah.
absolutely. It's kind of, you can see those the family tree, if you like.
Yeah. Now 85. Now I've got this record, but I think you'll have to put me straight on this because I don't exactly know what Trevor's involvement was in Propaganda.
Yeah, sure.
So this
Well,
is A Secret Wish from 1985.
yeah, well, it's a beautiful album. I mean,
Yeah.
Dream Within a Dream, which is the first track, is just one of my favorite
Yeah.
album tracks of all time. It's just fantastic. So, but yeah, that was mainly Steve Lipson, who was started off being Trevor Horn's engineer, and then actually in the late 80s, from sort of 87, 88, for about 3 or 4 years, they worked together as a partnership. So it was Trevor Horn and Steve Lipson who were producing. But it is a wonderful album. But the track that Trevor Horn produced was this one. It's Dr. Mabuse or Mabuse, or however you would say it. But this was 84,
Yeah.
and it's a big bombastic production with loads of kind of dramatic strings and orchestra in there, and it's just a great production. And the remixes are just out of this world. Some really fantastic drum programming and synths in there, and it's very dark. It's very I mean, very operatic, very film noir, actually, which is kind of where the Dots and Abuse comes from. And it's just a really great production. So I recommend. I think that album's fantastic anyway. So I think you should just get A Secret Wish. It's just brilliant. Paul Morley want them to be more like Germanic, kind of mad electronic music, but lots of kind of Germanic kind of sounds and Noi and all that kind of stuff. And
Krautrock.
Yeah, and kind of very very rough electronic stuff that sounds quite aggressive. So you keep feeding Steve Lipson all this kind of left-wing stuff. And meanwhile, like Jill Sinclair would say, no, we want them more to be like Fleetwood Mac. We want more to sound more like, a kind of nice pop group. So you have that the track Duel. You have Jewel as well, and Duel and Jewel are kind of like the two sides of Propaganda. So you have the nice Propaganda, and then you have this dark industrial Germanic kind of sounding propaganda.
I know you wanted to mention, was it ACT?
Yeah, I'm just showing off really, because this is like a really rare record, and I'm just really proud I've got a copy. I got this in the late 80s.
Okay.
And it was, I think it cost me 25 quid at the time, so it was quite pricey for a 12-inch. I think there's only about 40 or 50 of these in existence, I think.
Wow.
But the reason it's a fantastic record as well. It's a band called ACT, which was a guy called Thomas Lear. He was very much a kind of early electronic pioneer, with Claudia Brucken from Propaganda. It was their next project when Propaganda split up. So it's still on ZTT, and Trevor Horn produced it, and he produced. You can hear the 7-inch version, and there's also an alternative 12-inch version on a special collection that was released. But this is the 12-to-1 chance version, which has an ABBA sample on it. It has a take a chance on me, like that, and you hear it in the middle of it. And basically, because of that sample, they had to pull all the versions of this. So they basically destroyed all the copies apart from about 40, 50. So that's why I'm really, chuffed I've got this, because it's a fantastic production. I mean, I wish more people could hear it, because it's pure Trevor Horn. It's just bombastic and brilliant, and it's just great. Do
you have your copy insured then?
I don't know, but I think it's about it's about 400-500 quid. I think,
but it
is.
But
I was going to sell it. I mean, I would never pay 400-500 quid for this.
No.
If I didn't have it, but
you wouldn't pay that much for it, but you wouldn't sell it even if you needed 500 quid, would you?
It's my kind of it's the best thing I've got in my Trevor Horn collection.
Near the end now. I mean, Trevor did loads more things. So my suggestion is that we just whiz through a few things just really quickly, and then if we finish, if you tell us about the time when you interviewed Trevor Horn, that will be a nice close. So this is another thing which I picked up at the same time. I picked up the Dollar album last week. I also picked this up too.
Ah, nice. Yeah, I've got my copy here.
And so this is Introspective from 1988, Pet Shop Boys, and Steve and Trevor, they do 2 tracks on this record, I think. Yeah. Left to Own Devices and It's All Right.
But yeah, the production on those 2 tracks. I mean, what I love about this album, because I'm a massive fan of the Trevor Horn 12 inches. I think that's when, when he could remix his own stuff or do kind of long extended versions, or, like the Grace Jones album where he gets a chance to kind of just remix and do amazing stuff. That's where I think, that's my favorite stuff that he's ever done. And this is a 12-inch album. There's 3 tracks per side. So each track is a 12-inch. So it was 2 new 12 inches by Trevor Horn on an album. So, Left to My Own Devices is just an absolute classic. Typical Trevor Horn, all this bombastic orchestra, and it's the first time I think the Pet Shop Boys had an orchestra on a record. And It's All Right, which is just a beautiful production, absolutely beautiful. And for me at the time, it was just like the best thing Pet Shop Boys ever did.
Hearing it again at this distance, I listened to Left to My Own Devices the other night, and again I was struck by the ahead of its time kind of sense. It sounds so like a lot of 90s dance music. It's got just that kind of 90s dance music feel to it. The sounds that are on display there, just the pulse of it. Sounds a bit like house music in places. It's so cutting edge,
and obviously that was house music was coming in at that 87, 88, so that wouldn't have been lost on on Trevor Horn, and obviously the Pet Shop Boys as well, who were very particular. It's like I think there was a session in the where they were recording the orchestra, and Chris Lowe was like, "I hate it, absolutely hate it," and like kicking off, and Trevor was like, "Look, we'll sort it. You can't start saying you hate it in front of like a full orchestra; they'll get really upset," So it was they were very hands on with what they were doing, and they wouldn't put up with stuff that they didn't like, but. I think that really helped. I think their relationship obviously worked really well, and they got on well together. And there's a B side on their 12 inches that they wrote together. Obviously, Trevor Horn worked on a full album later on with the Pet Shop Boys,
which was the album he did with them later.
it's a fundamental.
Of course, right. Yeah.
So they did, and that's just like, I think Neil Tennant says himself, he wanted to make a Trevor Horn album.
Right.
So he said, with this album, obviously there's other producers and Pet Shop Boys on there, but they wanted to do a whole album with Trevor Horn. Yeah. And actually it was part of, at the time in the early sort of 2000s, I think it's about 2004, it rebooted Pet Shop Boys' career. I think it kind of started them off again, I think, because they'd had a bit of a time when they weren't as popular, and I think they were a bit dissatisfied with the stuff themselves, I think, as well. But they just work well together, and I love the 12 inches as well, of all very different, like the 7-inch and the 12-inch of It's All Right is much poppier, and the 12-inch again is very different to the 12-inch on Introspective, and again done by Trevor Horn and Steve Lipson. So it's them remixing their own stuff. Same with Left to My Own Devices. Again, a fantastic 10-minute version of Left to My Own Devices with loads of machinery chugging in the actual machinery in the background. You can hear devices. You talk about, I think the Pet Shop Boys talked about the Imperial Phase, and all the records we've talked about, from the first program we did and this one, this is Trevor Horn's Imperial Phase. This is where he was completely at the top of his game, and making absolutely cutting edge, groundbreaking records, which he does have moments of that going forward. But I think the 80s was where, because of the timing of it and the technology and him being younger, I think meant that this was like his kind of golden era.
Yeah, but of course he gets into the 90s and he doesn't stop, because we've got Seal. I mean, and you said that he did more records with him than with any other artist.
Yeah, I haven't got the vinyl, for Seal, because it's this one you can get, I think, quite cheaply, but some of the other Seal albums go for over £100 now on vinyl, because they haven't been reissued yet, and the 90s was when a lot of vinyl was going down in sales, and so they didn't release a lot of many vinyl albums. But the first album, this just first Seal album, this is in 91, which obviously had the single Crazy. Crazy is just such an amazing track. And I remember at the time, I used to read The NME quite a bit, and I was completely shocked but delighted when this got Single of the Week in NME. And it's not the sort of artist or at that time that would have, I imagine, got Single of the Week in NME, but it did. And I was delighted, because it is such a cracking record. And I think, again, one of Trevor Horn's greatest productions, and I kind of come back for ZTT as well, because ZTT had spent a few years out of the spotlight, if you like, but this was like a massive success. I was quickly going to mention, because they obviously worked on a Simple Minds, Steve Lipson's Trevor Horn worked on a Simple Minds album, Street Fighting Years, which is pretty good, but I really love this remix. It's called the Unauthorized Mix of Kick It In, and it's very electronic, very dancey, and it's one of the best kind of remixes that Steve Lipson and Trevor Horn did. I think it's fantastic. It's really, really brilliant.
89.
So this is Paul McCartney. So they worked with Macca on
Où le Soleil.
Où le Soleil. So this is the 12-inch.
Yeah, because of course
Où le Soleil.
They do a track on here, don't they? I mean, Où le Soleil was the CD bonus disc on Flowers in the Dirt. But
that's right.
But they also did Rough Ride on this record, didn't they?
I've read they brought out some like an interview with Trevor Horn and Steve Lipson about that album. I think it was like one of the special edition vinyl booklets, and they talk about the fact that they couldn't understand why Rough Ride wasn't a single. Because they say it was a really great record, and they could never understood why they released the other stuff off the album and not Rough Ride.
Have you ever seen? There's a really good interview with McCartney where he talks about what that song was before Trevor Horn and Steve Lipson got their hands on it. It was literally just this thing. He just had this rough ride. I'm on the rough ride. It was nothing. It was like just that. And he said he'd never seen anything like it. It was like 3 months in the studio, I mean, McCartney had always spent a long time making records, but usually not 3 months just taking this one little silly idea in just 3 months. And I think that was perhaps one of the reasons why he didn't do the whole album with them, because I think he said at the time, I'd have been there for 3 years making an album. If I'd done the entire record with Trevor and Steve, because I think he had a tour booked and he needed to get out on tour, and he could see that this was going. There's no way I can do an album with these guys. But I think it was a bit of an eye-opening experience for him.
Well, Trevor Horn had a reputation for spending like months and months in the studio, and I think that was probably the case in the 80s. I think in the 90s and 2000s, like for example, he did a Bell and Sebastian album in the 2000s, a very un-Trevor Horn-like band, you would think. But he did a fantastic record with them, and he kept it, really simple and fast and quick, and didn't spend like months and months on stuff. And it worked really well. And I think that reputation was very much from the 80s. I think, when, record companies could spend lots of money in studios, whereas they can't do that nowadays. It doesn't really happen. No.
I mean, I suppose just to wrap up, we can say that, Trevor went on to do, he did Tina Turner, he did Rod Stewart.
Yeah.
I mean, so you're talking, he's kind of moved past the Imperial Phase now.
And
Cher, yeah. So he's
Genesis.
Genesis. He just goes into just overdrive, just in terms of working for the biggest names on the block. And I guess he becomes the establishment in the end. He goes from being this almost a sort of underground guerrilla pop warrior in the early 80s to producing Rod Stewart and Cher in the 90s and beyond.
Well, you say that, and then in the in the early 2000s, he produces Tattoo. The Russian girl band, who were very, they had a very risque video at the time, and it was almost like Relax again. It was like, playing up to the kind of, the two girls and the kind of lesbian thing, and it was seen as quite controversial at the time. So he was always kind of, like that. He was kind of back into, his number one records and controversy, and so I think he always likes kind of stirring things up a bit and doing the unexpected, I think, because he just gets, just thinks, right, what's next? What can I do next that gets me excited? And I think I quite fancy doing this.
And I guess we should say, coming out of that you've said now that he's back with Jeff Downes now, and there's some talk of a Buggles reunion. Is this true, or is this kind of... This is internet chatter, or is this a genuine...
Apparently so. He did an interview. I did a YouTube interview a couple of months ago, and I asked a direct question: "Are you working on any Buggles stuff?" And he just said, "Yeah, Buggles stuff coming soon. Working on a new track, I think, or new tracks.
Exciting.
With Jeff Downes, and he's working on autobiography as well. So he can, the autobiography will completely diss everything that we've talked about, and will." contradict the opinions and the stories and things that we've talked about. I look forward to hearing that.
So do you want to just finish by just explaining to us what happened when you interviewed Trevor? Because it was when you were editing a magazine, wasn't it, I think?
Yeah. Well, I've actually interviewed him twice now, which is cool. The first time was around the first producers gig that he did, which was I think it was around 2006-07, I think it was, and I interviewed him for Future Music. Basically, I went to see the producers at the Roundhouse in Camden, and there was only about 150 people in there, and it was fantastic seeing him, playing bass close up, and Steve Lipson was there, and Lol Cream, and everyone was like singing along to the producer stuff. But they also did cover versions of like Rubber Bullets, and they, with Lol Cream singing the main part of that, and they did an instrumental version of Two Tribes. I mean, for me as a fan, I was just like, oh my God, I can't believe it. But I went and grabbed a quick interview with him backstage. I just sort of, said, hey, fancy an interview. And that was fun. We just talked about him getting out to perform live again, getting out of the studio. We talked a bit about Kraftwerk and how much he still loves Kraftwerk. And Steve Lipson popped his head in and said, forget all that, what Trevor's saying. The most important thing about a studio is good parking. He said, that's all you need for a studio, good parking.
I thought you were going to say good engineering. Nice. I thought you were going to say
no, he just said forget about what you've got in the studio, good parking. And then the second interview I did was for a website called Music Radar, which you can still, if you do a search online for the Music Radar article. And it was round about the time of the 30th anniversary of Welcome to the Pleasure Dome. So it was 2014, and it was an event that was held at Psalm West, in the studio where the album was recorded. It was the interview was done with Colleen Murphy from I think she does an event where she gets together different bands and talks about the making of the albums, and it was great. We just listened to the whole album. There's about 60 other people in the room, and we just listened to the whole album on vinyl. And then there was an interview with Trevor Horn, Steve Lipson, and JJ Jeksalik about the making of the album. And then afterwards, I went up to Trevor Horn's office, and we just did an interview, just a chat about his career in the industry. And we talked a bit about he just worked on a Billy Idol album, so he talked about working on that. And the fact that he can't believe that it's 30 years since Pleasure Dome happened and all that. And yeah, it was a great chat. It was only about 45 minutes, but I got a really nice interview with him. And that's online. If you do a search for Trevor Horn Music Radar, it was done in 2014.
We can find the link to that. I can link.
Yeah, sure. I'll
Okay.
You can put it in the under the notes. But yeah, it was great to meet Trevor Horn and chat about production, and also he's got the same synthesizer that I have as well, which is really great, because I love listening, because the Roland JX 8P is his favorite synth, and there's a couple of settings on that synthesizer, a couple of patches, and you hear them and you go, oh my god, that's Grace Jones, or that's Pet Shop Boys, so it's great to have the same bit of kit that he used as well. But all
excellent.
Good.
So just to conclude then, if we try to, or if you try to, so I'm going to put you on the spot, okay? If you were to try to contextualize Trevor Horn's contribution within the whole sweep of, pop music. So, you got these big kind of conspicuous names, shall we say, in the music, just in the story of pop music. Where does Trevor Horn fit into that? Is he one of the true big movers and shakers ever of pop music, would you say?
Well, you've got the Beatles here and the Buggles up here. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, I mean, it's he's one of the the greatest producers of all time, I think, with especially I think from the 80s. I think he was massively influential. Radiohead used to have a little plaque up in the studio that said, "What would Trevor Horn do?" And they used to take inspiration from that for the records that they were making, and you can hear his influence in production. I think his use of technology, I think especially at that time, was hugely groundbreaking, and everyone from the Orb to the Prodigy, and just the whole electronic music scene, the whole dance scene was massively influenced by those early records by Art of Noise and Frankie and Propaganda and Grace Jones. They were just hugely influential, I think. So I think his legacy is that he's definitely one of the most influential producers of all time, and certainly one of the best, in my opinion.
Brilliant, excellent. Right, well, I hope you enjoyed that, folks. Our two-part, well, hopefully two-part, might be three-part. I'll have to see how long we've been rambling on.
We've got the 90s and the 2000s to do yet, Jim. There's,
Yeah, well, you never know. Never say never. But yeah, so for now, anyway, I hope you enjoyed that look at Trevor Horn.
That's the reflections. That's
the big guy. There's the big guy. Yeah. Leave some comments below, folks. Let us know what you think of Trevor Horn. Do you have a favourite Trevor Horn album or a favourite Trevor Horn 12-inch? Or is there a particular era of Trevor Horn which floats your boat? Are you somebody who was not aware of Trevor Horn? If so, be gone forever from this channel and never darken its doors again. But yeah, just kind of let us know what you make of Trevor Horn, and just let us know if you enjoyed the video or not, as the case may be. So thanks, Jamie. Enjoyed that. Tremendous stuff.
Good stuff. Thanks, Jim. See you again soon.
Bye, folks.
There's you've got incredible producers. that I've completely forgotten all of them at the moment. But you know, you've got the Beatles producers and
George Martin,
producer,
Jamie.
George Martin. That's it. I've forgotten who he was.
George something.
Who is he? George somebody or other. I don't know. And then there's that Jeff Smith.